It's 11:35. This is Bev Turner today on GB News. Now, joining me now is famous actor James Murray. You might know him from a series of The Crown, where he plays Prince Andrew. But a big passion of James's is something you may not know about. He's wild. He's wild for salmon fishing. I didn't write that, James. He's wild for salmon fishing. The Loch Long Salmon Company is proposing plans to house tons of salmons. James, thank you for coming in. Famous actor in The Crown and other series that we will know you from. A lot of people will also know you from the series that you do with Robson Green.
Yeah.
The fishing series.
Robson and Jim's Fly Fishing Adventures.
Thank you. I've watched every single episode.
I bet you have.
I haven't. But is that where your interest in the waterways and what's happening to our fish stocks came from?
Yeah. I mean, when I fell in love with fly fishing for salmon 15 years ago, it became very obvious to me very quickly the big challenges that salmon faced as a wild species. And it was shocking to me. And I thought, well, if I didn't know about it, perhaps many others don't.
Yeah.
So I sort of made it a bit of a life's work to educate and create awareness.
Wow. What do we need to know about? So just presume I'm an idiot.
Yes.
Now, we should also confess that we've known each other for 25 years, so you know that I am an idiot.
Yes.
Right.
I'm not pretending there, Bev.
So what is wrong with our fish stocks, particularly salmon? Where have we gone wrong?
Well, salmon, let's start at the beginning. So since we started taking records, proper records in the 70s, there were 10 million wild Atlantic salmon as a population. There are now only 3 million.
Wow.
That's across the whole of the North Atlantic. Scotland, the rivers up in Scotland have lost 70% of their wild stock in the last 20 years. So they're on an acute decline.
Why?
Well,
where have they gone?
There are several suspects. Obviously, climate change is first and foremost. Overpollution of the rivers, bad regulation of predation from aviation prey and from prey under the water, but also aquaculture, fish farms. The salmon that you buy in the supermarkets and at the fish counter is predominantly farmed Atlantic salmon.
Right.
And there is a myriad of issues when it comes to the sustainability of farmed Atlantic salmon.
Right.
And the best way to perhaps educate about that is to visualize how these fish are farmed. So if you imagine rows of circular nets beneath the water, which are open, crammed full of farm fish, so it's rife for disease, pathogens and parasites. So that has to be treated. Obviously, the knock-on effect on that is huge animal welfare issues. 25% of all farm salmon die before they even reach the age of harvest. That's 1 in 4. That's, just to put that in perspective, that's less than 5% of poultry die. You know, that's their mortality rate. So there's the animal welfare issue. There's also the spreading. The real problem fish farms have is trying to keep the lice under control, the parasites, which tend to eat the fish from the outside in. Now, that spreads through the net out into the surrounding environment. And these farms are on coastlines and in estuaries where the wild stock, where the wild salmon, the few that are left, and the sea trout swim past, and they get ensconced in this proliferation of lice. So it's huge.
So whose job is it to kind of police that? Is that the Environment Agency? Is it DEFRA? Is it, why is this being allowed to happen? I mean, like you say, there's not a lot of awareness about it.
There's not a lot of awareness. It should be regulated by government bodies, DEFRA, SEPA up in Scotland, the EA. But sadly, as we all know, when it comes to the environment, the current government have the will and energy of a stranded jellyfish. So it needs to be much more heavily regulated, but there's too much money swishing around the system for it to be too heavily regulated. These companies, aquaculture is predominantly owned by a very small handful of Norwegian billionaires, which have shareholders to account for. Yeah. So there is a mitigation to stop most of these issues, and that is to move the salmon out of open cage farms and put them in self-containment pens, which obviously creates a barrier between the fish and their environment. That costs money. Now, I believe that the customer will probably pay the extra to ensure that the fish they've got on their plate is sustainably farmed. But they don't want to do that.
And if there's awareness of it, I guess. So if we are buying our let's say Christmas, your salmon, smoked salmon is a big part of Christmas, right?
Yeah.
If we're going out to the shops to buy it, what should we look for? How does the producer or the manufacturer of that fish, how do they tell us what we are and are not buying? What do we look for?
Well, that's a good question. Obviously, the only way we can educate ourselves as a customer is to look at the label of the product. Now, we know that, with other products, that supermarkets and suppliers who tend to be in cahoots about their labelling make it less than opaque a lot of the time. So there's a lot of self-aggrandizing labelling, such as organic or responsibly sourced. Pay no attention to what is obviously a label that's self-inflicted or self-imposed.
Yeah.
Go look for a label from an independent regulator.
Yeah.
Best of which, as far as I'm concerned, is MSC, which is a big blue tick on the packet, and that stands for Marine Stewardship Council.
Right.
And they are an independent body that certify whether that product is sustainably sourced or not.
Will it be more expensive for people?
It might be, but if you swap out your farmed Atlantic salmon for line-caught wild Alaskan or sockeye Pacific salmon, which have their own issues but aren't farmed as intensively and are more sustainably farmed for the most part than their Atlantic cousins, then you're going to pay the same price for a fish that has higher nutritional quality and is much more sustainably sourced.
So it won't say farmed Atlantic salmon. Will it say
No,
farmed?
of course not. It'll say Scottish, beautiful Scottish Highland salmon. So you think, oh, someone's gone out and caught that and prepared it. No, it just comes from a big stew pot of fish in the middle of it.
David Attenborough has been talking about this, I think, hasn't he, as well?
Yeah.
Like, he's one of the few people that's been discussing it. Have you got another series of your fishing programme?
We do. We have a second series coming out in the spring, where we're up in Scotland and Wales and England, and we're addressing this very issue because we were asked to go and make a fishing show because the first one achieved a certain amount
did
of
really
love.
well.
So we went back and did a second one for ITV, and we found very quickly that we weren't catching the fish that they expected us to catch.
Maybe you're just rubbish fishermen.
Well, we are rubbish fishermen too, but it was also to do with the state of the rivers, and we ended up pulling our hair out, going on the phone to the commissioners, going, we still haven't caught fish. And it's not our fault, so we made it about conservation and the state of our rivers as much about us being terrible anglers.
So you'd notice that difference in that short period of time?
Oh, yeah. The graph is acute when it comes to salmon. It's tragic. That we'll probably lose them in our children's lifetime, certainly, if we don't do anything about it now.
OK. One last question. What was it like being on The Crown, playing Prince Andrew? Dilemma? Was that role easy to take?
Yeah, it was a shoo-in. No, it was fun. I mean, we didn't deal with any of the topics that he's so prevalent for in the press at the moment. So, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
great fun being on The Crown.
Oh, James, thank you for coming in.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Brilliant.